Good evening, and welcome back to Sleepy Historian. Tonight you can allow your shoulders to soften a little, your breathing to slow, and the quiet rhythm of a distant past to unfold at a pace that asks nothing urgent of you. If you are listening while resting, perhaps under a blanket, perhaps with the room dim and quiet, you may simply let the story drift around you. There is no need to stay awake for every moment. Many listeners do not. History, after all, has always moved slowly enough to welcome wandering attention. So settle in gently. Tonight we will walk very slowly through a city that still exists today, though it has changed more than visitors often realize. The city is Edinburgh, in Scotland, a place of tall stone buildings, narrow streets, and a castle that rises from dark volcanic rock like something quietly observing the centuries. Today it is often imagined as elegant, scholarly, even a little romantic. But the truth, as it often is in history, feels quieter and heavier. Because living in Edinburgh during the early 1800s was not particularly comfortable, the city was beautiful from a distance. Up close, however, it was crowded. Stone walls held the cold long after sunset. Staircases climbed endlessly through dim tenements. Smoke from coal fires drifted slowly through narrow streets where sunlight sometimes struggled to reach the ground, and most people who lived there did not experience Edinburgh as travelers do now. They experienced it one small task at a time, climbing stairs, carrying water, working long hours beneath dim windows, waiting for warmth that rarely lasted very long. This evening you will not be learning about famous philosophers or grand historical events. Edinburgh certainly had those: universities, scholars, lawyers and writers who debated ideas late into the night. But that is not where our attention will rest. Instead, we will follow the slower rhythm of ordinary life. You will gradually experience what it might have felt like to move through the city as an ordinary resident, someone who wakes before the streets are busy, who climbs narrow staircases carrying a bucket, who steps out into air that smells faintly of smoke and damp stone. At first the city might seem intriguing, but as the hours pass and the cold lingers and the staircases grow longer, something else becomes clear. Living here required patience, a quiet kind of endurance, and perhaps the most surprising truth of all is this: for much of the early 1800s, Edinburgh was one of the most crowded cities in Europe, especially in the Old Town, where buildings grew upward instead of outward. Some tenements reached 10 or 11 stories high, towering above streets that were already narrow. Entire families lived within single rooms. Floors creaked with footsteps from neighbors above and below, and every morning, long before daylight in winter, people began the slow routines that allowed life to continue. You might hear the distant creak of a wooden cart, the faint sound of boots on stone, a door opening somewhere above, followed by the careful descent of someone beginning the long journey down a spiral staircase. If you were standing in one of these streets at dawn, the city would feel almost suspended in gray light. Mist often gathered between the tall buildings, coal smoke drifted slowly upward from chimneys, and somewhere far above the rooftops the dark outline of Edinburgh Castle watched silently from its volcanic cliff. But down below, life unfolded at a much smaller scale. You might notice a woman carrying 2 iron buckets toward a public well, a shopkeeper lifting wooden shutters from his windows, a child carefully stepping across uneven cobblestones still damp from the night air. None of these movements were hurried, not because people had plenty of time, but because the city itself moved slowly. Stone streets slowed carts, heavy doors resisted opening, staircases demanded patience, and winter-long Scottish winter made everything feel just a little heavier, even indoors. Because stone, as you may already suspect, does not easily release the cold. Fires helped, of course, but coal was precious, and heat rarely traveled far beyond the room where it burned. Many nights in Edinburgh were spent close to small fires, wrapped in wool, listening to the distant sounds of wind threading its way through narrow streets. And sometimes, as people slept, frost quietly gathered along the inside edges of windows. Not dramatically, just enough to remind you that the outside world was always waiting, just beyond the stone. As our evening continues, we will slowly explore how people lived within this environment. You will climb the staircases of crowded tenements. You will stand in quiet lines beside public wells. You will walk narrow streets where carts pass carefully between buildings that lean slightly toward each other, as if sharing old conversations. You will notice how daylight moves slowly across the city, and how early darkness settles during winter months. And perhaps as the hours pass, you will begin to feel something else that defined life in 1800s Edinburgh. A certain stillness. Not silence exactly, because cities are never truly silent, but a calm persistence. The quiet understanding that tomorrow will look very much like today. Another staircase, another bucket of water, another long walk through stone streets beneath a pale northern sky. There is something oddly soothing in that kind of rhythm, and perhaps that is why cities like Edinburgh, despite their hardships, were places where life continued generation after generation. People adjusted, they endured, they moved through the routines of the city with the same quiet patience that you might feel settling over you now. So as we continue, you may imagine yourself standing at the edge of the old town. The castle above you, the narrow streets stretching downward in winding lines of stone, morning mist moving slowly between buildings, and somewhere nearby the faint echo of footsteps beginning another ordinary day. We will begin there, walking gently beneath the castle, into the streets of 1800s Edinburgh, and as the city slowly unfolds, you may simply listen, or drift, or sleep. History, after all, will keep moving whether we notice every step or not. If you begin your walk in Edinburgh during the early 1800s, the first thing you notice is not the castle. Not immediately. The castle is there, of course, resting high above the city on its dark volcanic rock, but the streets beneath it claim your attention first. They feel narrow, narrower than most people expect. You step carefully onto uneven cobblestones that have been worn smooth in places by centuries of footsteps and iron car wheels. The stones hold the night's dampness, and even in daylight they often glisten faintly, reflecting a soft gray sky above. If you pause for a moment and breathe in slowly, the air carries a mixture of scents: coal smoke, damp stone, and occasionally the faint trace of something cooking behind a shuttered window. None of it is overwhelming. The city does not strike you as loud or chaotic. Instead, it feels compressed, as though life here has been gently folded inward between the tall stone buildings. Because those buildings are tall. Very tall. In the old town, space is limited by the ridge of land on which the city sits. There is little room to expand outward, so the buildings climb upward instead, 10 stories, sometimes even more. From the street below, the windows seem stacked endlessly toward the sky, each one framed by dark stone that is slowly darkened further with smoke and weather. You might tilt your head back slightly to see them all, and as you do, you notice something else. Laundry lines stretched between windows, a small bucket being lowered carefully from one floor to another. Someone leaning out for a moment, glancing down at the street before withdrawing again. Life here does not remain behind closed doors. It spills gently outward. The street beneath the castle is not perfectly straight. Instead, it curves slightly as it follows the slope of the land. Smaller passages branch away at irregular intervals, narrow alleyways known locally as closes. If you step toward one, you will see that it quickly narrows further. Stone walls press close on either side. The light grows dimmer, and the sounds of the main street soften behind you. These closes are not merely shortcuts. They are the veins of the old town. Within them you find staircases climbing upward into crowded tenements, small courtyards where water barrels rest against walls, and doorways that lead into buildings containing dozens of residents stacked floor upon floor. But for now you remain on the main street. It is still early. The day is only beginning to gather momentum. A cart passes slowly beside you, its wooden wheels turning carefully over the stones. The horse moves patiently, its breath faintly visible in the cool morning air. The driver does not hurry. He guides the cart through the narrow space with practiced ease. Everyone here understands that the streets demand patience. You cannot rush stone. Farther along, a shopkeeper lifts the wooden shutters from his window. The hinges creak slightly as the panels swing outward. Inside the shop, the interior is dim, but you notice the glow of a small coal fire beginning to take hold in the hearth. That fire will warm the room eventually. But stone walls warm slowly. Very slowly. You might notice people moving through the street, now never in large crowds, but in a steady trickle. A woman carrying a basket wrapped in cloth. Two children walking close together, stepping carefully between puddles left by the night air. A man in a thick wool coat adjusting the strap of a leather satchel across his shoulder. None of them seem particularly hurried. The rhythm of the city encourages slower movement. Even the sounds here move differently. Because the buildings rise so high and stand so close together, noise echoes softly between them. A single conversation can drift farther than expected. The clip of a horse's hooves repeats itself faintly against the stone walls, and occasionally, very faintly, you may hear the distant toll of a bell. Church bells were an important rhythm in Edinburgh life. They marked time long before most households owned reliable clocks. The bell you hear now might be calling the hour, or signaling the beginning of morning prayers, or simply reminding the city that another day has begun. You continue walking. Above you, the castle finally becomes visible between the buildings. Its stone walls rise sharply from the cliff, dark and heavy against the pale sky. From here below, it feels less like a monument and more like an ancient guardian, something that has watched the city change slowly for centuries. But the castle is distant. Your attention returns again to the street itself, to the cobblestones, to the slow movement of carts and pedestrians, to the subtle chill that lingers even after the sun climbs higher. Edinburgh sits far enough north that warmth rarely arrives quickly. Even in seasons that are technically considered mild, the air often carries a persistent coolness. Stone holds that coolness with remarkable dedication. The walls of these buildings absorb the night's cold and release it only reluctantly throughout the day. If you were to step inside one of the tenements along this street, you would likely notice the difference immediately. Outside air might feel brisk but fresh. Inside, the air becomes still, slightly damp, and faintly smoky from the coal fires that burn almost constantly. But those interiors can wait. For now you continue along the street, passing more closes, more doorways, more tall buildings leaning slightly toward one another, as though sharing quiet conversations across the narrow space between them. Occasionally a window opens. A brief gust of warmer air escapes, then the window closes again. It is easy to imagine how life here becomes shaped by repetition. Every day begins with these same streets, these same cobblestones, the same gradual brightening of the sky above the rooftops. And as you walk beneath the castle, you begin to understand something important about Edinburgh in the early 1800s. The city is not built for speed, it is built for endurance. Stone stairs climbed many times each day, water carried from wells. Coal fires tended carefully to stretch their warmth through long evenings. And all of it unfolding within these narrow streets where the castle watches quietly from above. You will explore those staircases soon enough. Because above the street, beyond the doors you pass now, entire communities live stacked high within the tall tenements. Reaching them requires patience and quite a few steps. But first, you pause for a moment longer in the street beneath the castle, listening to the slow awakening of the city. Sooner or later, if you live in Edinburgh's old town in the early 1800s, the street is no longer enough, because above the shops, above the narrow closes, above the heavy wooden doors set into dark stone walls, entire communities live stacked one floor upon another. To reach them, you must climb. And so, as you pause beside one of the narrow alleyways branching from the street beneath the castle, you might notice a doorway set slightly back into the stone. It is not impressive, just a thick wooden door, darkened by weather and many hands pushing it open through the years. If you step closer and push gently, the door yields with a low, tired creak. Immediately the air changes. Outside, the morning carried the faint movement of wind and smoke. But here inside, the air feels still, almost paused, with the quiet coolness that stone walls hold day and night. Your eyes adjust slowly. The light is dim. A small window somewhere above allows a thin column of gray daylight to reach the center of the stairwell. Dust drifts lazily through it, moving so slowly that the passage of time itself seems softer here. Before you stands the staircase, stone, curving gently upward. The steps are worn smooth at their centers from centuries of feet climbing and descending the same narrow spiral. If you place your hand lightly against the wall beside you, you will notice something immediately. The stone is cold, not painfully cold, but persistent. It is the kind of coolness that seems to belong to the building itself rather than to the weather outside. Now imagine beginning the climb. One step, then another. The staircase turns slowly around a central column of stone. With each few steps, the view below disappears, replaced by the curve of the wall and the faint echo of movement somewhere above. Because you are not alone in this building. Far from it. Many Edinburgh tenements in this period contain dozens of residents. Entire families may occupy single rooms on different floors, while neighbors share hallways, stair landings, and sometimes even small kitchens. Life here is layered. As you climb to the first landing, you pass a wooden door slightly ajar. From inside comes the quiet crackle of a small coal fire, and the faint murmur of voices speaking softly in the morning light. The door closes again as someone inside notices the draft, and you continue upward. The second flight of stairs feels just slightly steeper than the first. Your footsteps echo gently. Stone is very good at remembering sound. You might notice marks worn into the edges of the steps, where thousands of shoes have struck the same place again and again. Some steps tilt slightly toward the center, worn into shallow curves by time itself. The staircase is not decorative. It is simply used every day by people carrying buckets of water, bundles of firewood, sacks of coal, baskets of laundry, and sometimes sleeping children too tired to climb the final steps themselves. At the next landing, a narrow window allows a little more daylight to slip into the stairwell. Through it, you glimpse the outside world again. A slice of gray sky, the top of a nearby roof, and perhaps the faint outline of smoke drifting slowly upward from a chimney. Then the staircase turns again, upward, higher. It is easy to imagine how the simple act of returning home each evening might feel heavier than expected. After a full day of work, perhaps standing in a shop, or laboring in a workshop, or walking long distances across the city, the climb home remains. 3 flights, 5, 7, sometimes more. And remember, these staircases carry more than people. Every bucket of water drawn from a well must travel upward here. Every piece of coal purchased for the fire must be hauled step by step to the family room above. Even furniture, when it arrives, must somehow be maneuvered through these narrow spirals. You continue climbing. Halfway up the next flight, you hear footsteps descending slowly from above. A woman appears around the curve of the staircase, holding a metal bucket carefully with both hands. She pauses briefly to allow space for you to press against the wall. There is not much room. Staircases like this were never meant for easy passing. She continues downward, her footsteps steady but cautious. The bucket is empty now, but before long she will return with it filled from the well below, and the climb will feel heavier. Another landing passes, another door. This one opens briefly, releasing a thin ribbon of warmer air and the smell of porridge cooking over a small coal fire. You glimpse a table, a single candle, 2 children sitting quietly while someone stirs the pot. Then the door closes again. Life continues behind the stone, higher still. The stairwell grows dimmer now. The narrow window you passed earlier was the primary source of daylight for several floors, and beyond it the interior becomes more shadowed. Many residents carry small lanterns during darker hours. At night the climb becomes slower, careful. But even during the day, the dimness encourages patience. Stone buildings do not rush. At last you reach another landing where the staircase widens slightly. Here a wooden bench sits against the wall, worn smooth from years of use. Someone may pause here after carrying coal up several flights, resting for a moment before finishing the climb. Perhaps you pause as well, listening. Somewhere above, a child laughs briefly. A door closes. Footsteps move across a wooden floor. And beneath it all, the quiet stillness of the building itself. Because Edinburgh's tenements are not simply houses, they are small vertical villages, each floor containing lives unfolding in parallel rhythms. Morning fires being lit, water being boiled, shoes being tied before another day begins, and all of it connected by this single staircase, turning patiently upward through the heart of the building. Soon enough you will step back outside, but before that happens, one realization settles quietly into place. In a city where buildings rise 10 stories high, and streets remain narrow, and water waits far below at the well, daily life is shaped by steps, thousands of them. Climb slowly, every single day. Sooner or later in Edinburgh during the early 1800s, every resident must make the same quiet journey, not toward the castle, not toward the markets, but toward water, because the tall tenement buildings you have been climbing, impressive as they may appear from the street, contain something surprisingly simple. They do not have running water. Inside the rooms where families live, where fires burn slowly in small hearths and narrow windows, look down onto cobbled streets, there are tables, beds, stools, perhaps a chest for clothing, but there are no pipes, no taps, no convenient basin where water simply appears. Instead, water waits somewhere else in the city, usually at a public well. So if you live several floors above the street, perhaps 6, perhaps 8, the day begins not only with waking, but with the slow recognition that water must be carried upward. And so sometime after the first gray light of morning begins to settle between the tall buildings, you find yourself stepping back out onto the street. The same cobblestones, the same quiet air carrying faint coal smoke, but now you carry something with you, a bucket, sometimes iron, sometimes wood bound with metal rings, empty for the moment, but not for long. The well might not be far away in distance, but the journey still takes time, because many others are making the same walk. You move slowly along the narrow street beneath the tenements, passing doorways where neighbors emerge carrying their own buckets. Some walk alone, others guide small children who hold smaller containers of their own. No one seems surprised to see this quiet procession. This is simply how the morning begins. If you follow the street far enough, you eventually reach a small open space where the buildings step back slightly. Here stands the well. Not grand, just a stone structure rising waist-high from the ground, with a wooden beam overhead supporting a rope and pulley. The rope disappears into darkness below where cool water waits far beneath the surface. Around the well, people gather patiently. There is rarely any hurry. Everyone understands the rhythm. One bucket lowered. The rope creaks slightly as it slides across the wooden beam. A faint splash echoes upward from the darkness below. Then the slow work of pulling begins, hand over hand, the rope heavy now with the weight of water. When the bucket finally appears above the edge of the stone ring, droplets spill back into the well with small, echoing sounds. Someone lifts the bucket aside carefully, pouring water into their own container. Then the rope is lowered again, and the quiet cycle continues. If you stand nearby for a moment, you might notice how calm the atmosphere feels. People speak softly if they speak at all. The air is cool. Mist sometimes lingers in these open spaces during early morning, drifting slowly between the stone walls surrounding the well. The smell here is slightly different from the streets. Less coal smoke, more damp stone, perhaps the faint earthy scent of water that has waited underground through long Scottish winters. You watch as a woman beside you lowers her bucket into the well. The rope slides slowly through her hands. She pauses when she feels the bucket reach the water below. Then she pulls, carefully, steadily. When the bucket reaches the top, the surface of the water trembles slightly, reflecting the pale light of the sky above. She fills her container, then steps away. Now it is your turn. You lower the bucket. The rope feels rough against your hands, worn by years of use. When the bucket touches the water below, the sound rises faintly from the depths. Pulling it back up requires patience. Water is heavy. Even a single bucket can feel surprisingly substantial by the time it reaches the top. You lift it carefully. Some of the water sloshes gently against the rim. Then you pour it into your own container. One bucket is often not enough. Cooking, washing, tea, cleaning. Each task draws a little from the same supply, so the process repeats: lower, splash, pull, lift, pour. The morning continues quietly around you. Some residents finish quickly and begin the slow walk back toward their buildings. Others remain a little longer, filling several containers before beginning the climb home. Because that climb is the final part of the journey, and it may be the most tiring, you begin walking again through the narrow streets, the bucket now filled with water that moves gently with each step. The handle presses against your fingers. The weight grows more noticeable the farther you travel. You reach the doorway of your tenement, push it open. The familiar cool air of the stairwell greets you again. And now the staircase waits, stone steps spiraling upward, one floor, then another. With every few steps the bucket pulls slightly downward, reminding you that gravity is patient and consistent. You pause briefly at a landing. Not for long. Just long enough to shift the bucket to your other hand. Then you continue climbing. Residents pass you occasionally, some descending with empty containers, others already carrying water of their own. The stairwell echoes softly with footsteps. The building breathes slowly around you. Another landing. Another door. At last, after several flights, you reach your floor. You step into the small room where your family waits. The bucket rests beside the hearth now, the water inside catching the faint glow of the coal fire. Soon it will be heated, used, gradually emptied. And tomorrow morning, or perhaps even later today, the journey will begin again. Because in 1800s Edinburgh, water was never something that simply arrived. It was something carried, step by step, up the stairs, every single day. By the time you finally return from the well, climbing the long flights of stone stairs with a bucket of water pulling steadily at your arm, the morning in 1800s Edinburgh has already begun in earnest. You push open the heavy wooden door of your room, and everything that makes up your daily life exists inside this single space. Not a house, not a collection of rooms, just one. In the tall tenements of Edinburgh's Old Town, entire families often live inside a single chamber that must serve as kitchen, bedroom, workshop, and living room all at once. At first glance, the room feels surprisingly small. The ceiling slopes slightly beneath the roof beams. The walls are thick stone, holding on to the chill of the Scottish air even when a fire burns nearby. A narrow window faces the street, letting in pale daylight that filters through drifting smoke and morning mist. The glass in that window is uneven, old. When sunlight touches it, the view outside bends slightly, turning the tall buildings opposite into wavering shapes. But the room is not empty. It is carefully arranged. Against one wall stands a bed, sometimes shared by several members of the household. The frame may be simple wood. The mattress is often stuffed with straw or wool, covered with blankets that grow heavier during the long winter months. Near the bed sits a small chest. Inside it are the family's most valuable possessions: clothing, letters, perhaps a few coins carefully saved. Across the room, the hearth forms the center of everything. A shallow stone fireplace holds the coal fire that warms the room and cooks the food. The fire rarely burns brightly. Coal is expensive, and every piece must last as long as possible, so the flames remain small, steady. The glow of the coals produces a quiet warmth that spreads slowly through the room. You place your bucket of water near the hearth. Soon it will be heated in an iron pot suspended above the fire. Hot water is useful for many things: tea, porridge, washing hands, cleaning utensils. But every drop must be measured carefully. Nothing is wasted. If you listen closely, the room carries many subtle sounds. The faint hiss of coal shifting in the fire, the creak of the wooden floorboards when someone moves, the distant murmur of voices drifting upward from the street far below. Sometimes you hear footsteps in the stairwell outside, other families moving through the building, because this single tenement structure holds many lives stacked vertically, like layers in a tall stone hive. In some buildings, hundreds of people live under one roof. Children move through the room with quiet familiarity. They know exactly where everything belongs. A stool near the table, a folded blanket tucked into the corner, a small iron kettle resting beside the hearth. Nothing in the room is unnecessary. Every object earns its place by being useful. Soon the simple tasks of the morning begin. A pot is placed above the fire. A handful of oats is poured into boiling water. Porridge thickens slowly as it cooks, filling the room with a warm, earthy smell that mingles with coal smoke. This meal will be simple, but it will be enough. Food in this time is not designed for excitement or variety. It is designed for endurance, steady nourishment that allows the long hours of work to continue. While the porridge cooks, someone may sit near the window to mend clothing. A needle moves quietly through worn fabric. Thread pulled tight, another small repair that helps a garment survive another week of use. Clothing must last as long as possible. A torn sleeve or worn hem is never discarded quickly. Instead, it is patched, then patched again, and perhaps patched one more time. Meanwhile, the room slowly warms. Not much, but enough that the cold stone walls begin to release their grip on the air. If you glance out the window, the street below is becoming more active now. Carts roll slowly across the cobbles. Vendors call softly to early customers. Somewhere nearby a church bell rings, marking the passing of the hour. Inside the tenement, those sounds arrive softened and distant, like echoes drifting upward through the narrow streets. Breakfast is served in simple bowls. The porridge is thick and steaming. Sometimes a little salt is added, sometimes a small splash of milk, but often it is eaten plain, warm, filling, comforting in its predictability. After the meal, the room must be prepared for the day ahead, because this space, small as it is, will soon transform into many different places depending on what the family does for work. If someone is a shoemaker, tools may appear on the table, leather stretched, needles ready. If someone sews clothing for neighbors, fabric might cover the small workspace near the window where daylight is strongest. Other families leave the room entirely, heading into the streets to sell goods, carry cargo, or perform the countless jobs that keep a growing city alive. But the room itself never rests. Even when its residents leave, it waits quietly. The coal fire slowly fades. The light through the window shifts as clouds move across the Scottish sky. Dust settles gently across the table and floorboards, and above and below and all around, the same pattern continues. Other rooms, other families, other fires glowing softly in stone hearths. Each one part of the vast vertical city that Edinburgh had become by the early 19th century. From the outside, the tenement buildings look almost grand, towering stone structures rising high above the narrow streets. But inside them, life unfolds quietly within small rooms like this one. Rooms where people sleep, eat, work, raise children, share stories, and watch the slow passing of ordinary days. The room is small, yet somehow it contains an entire world. Eventually, the small room grows quieter. Breakfast bowls have been cleared away. The fire settles into a steady glow of dark red coals. The narrow window now admits a stronger gray daylight that slowly fills the corners of the room. And somewhere below, the city is waking more fully. If you lean near the window, you can hear it. Not a sudden rush of activity, but a gradual layering of sounds. Footsteps on cobblestones. A wooden cart rolling slowly over uneven stone. A distant voice calling something you cannot quite make out. Life gathering itself together. Soon enough you find yourself stepping back out into the stairwell once more. The familiar spiral staircase waits in the dim light. Stone worn smooth from generations of use curves gently downward, disappearing toward the doorway far below. You begin the descent. Your footsteps echo softly along the circular walls as you move down past floor after floor. Doors open occasionally. A child darts past you carrying a small bundle. A man climbs upward with a sack of coal over one shoulder. The air inside the stairwell carries a mixture of scents, damp stone, faint smoke, wool clothing still holding traces of yesterday's weather. Eventually you reach the ground floor. The heavy door opens, and suddenly the narrow street of Old Town Edinburgh surrounds you again. Here the city feels very different from the quiet room above. The street is not wide. In fact, it is surprisingly narrow, with tall stone buildings rising steeply on both sides. Their upper floors lean slightly inward, as though the city itself were slowly folding toward the sky. Looking upward from the street, the strip of visible sky appears thin and pale. Smoke drifts across it from dozens of chimneys. Yet despite the tight space, the street feels alive. People move carefully along the uneven cobblestones, navigating around puddles and carts and the occasional pile of refuse left to be collected later. Vendors have already begun their work. A woman stands beside a small wooden table displaying loaves of coarse bread. The crusts are dark and sturdy, baked early this morning in a nearby oven. Beside her, a man pushes a cart stacked with vegetables brought from farms outside the city. Turnips, cabbages, potatoes, all still dusted with soil from the fields. He pauses occasionally, calling out quietly to those passing by, not shouting, just a steady voice repeating the same offer again and again. Nearby, another cart carries fish packed in damp straw. The smell arrives before the cart itself becomes visible, a sharp reminder that the sea lies only a few miles away. You continue walking slowly along the street. Above you, lines of laundry hang between windows like quiet flags moving gently in the wind. Shirts and linens sway slightly, drying in the cool air. From open windows, voices drift down. Someone laughing, someone calling a child back inside. Someone arguing softly about the price of coal. These sounds mix together in a strange kind of harmony. Nothing dominates. Everything blends. As you walk, the ground beneath your feet remains uneven. Centuries of use have worn the stones into shallow dips where rainwater collects. Your boots step carefully around them, sometimes finding drier patches along the edges of the street. Occasionally a cart passes close by. The wheels creak loudly as they roll across the stones. The horse pulling the cart moves patiently, its breath visible in the cool air as small clouds of steam. Drivers guide them carefully through the crowded streets, avoiding pedestrians with quiet skill. Everyone here understands the rhythm of these narrow roads. You move aside when necessary, then continue on your way. At certain corners, the streets open briefly into slightly wider spaces known as closes or small courtyards. These pockets of space allow a little more light to reach the ground. Children sometimes gather here, playing simple games with stones or bits of wood. Their voices echo softly between the tall buildings before drifting upward toward the high windows above. Further along, a small bakery releases the warm smell of fresh bread into the street. The scent is comforting, rich. For a moment it overpowers the usual smells of coal smoke and damp stone. Inside the bakery, workers move steadily beside large ovens, sliding loaves onto wooden paddles and stacking finished bread into baskets. But even here, the pace is calm. Nothing in this city moves quickly. The streets themselves discourage haste. Too narrow, too crowded, too full of the small obstacles that naturally gather where many lives intersect. As the morning continues, the population of the street thickens gradually. Workers heading toward the docks, apprentices carrying tools, merchants opening the shutters of their shops, each person following a routine that repeats day after day. If you pause for a moment and simply watch, you may notice something curious. Despite the crowded conditions, despite the narrow streets and tall buildings, the mood here is not frantic. It is steady, predictable. People know where they are going. They know the pace required. They understand the quiet choreography of city life. And so the street continues breathing slowly around you. Carts pass, voices rise and fall. Laundry moves gently overhead. The thin strip of sky shifts from pale gray toward a slightly brighter shade. Another ordinary morning in 1800s Edinburgh unfolds one small step at a time. If you continue walking along the narrow streets of Old Town Edinburgh, sooner or later the towering presence of the castle reminds you where you are. It rises above the city like a dark silhouette against the pale sky. From many corners of the town you can see it perched on its volcanic rock, stone walls layered upon stone walls, watching quietly over the streets that spread outward below. But down here, beneath its shadow, life is far less grand, because for most people in the early 1800s, the majority of their waking hours are not spent looking at the castle. They are spent working, and work begins early. If you follow the slow flow of people moving along the street, you will notice that they gradually separate into smaller paths, each person turning toward the place where their daily labor waits. Some disappear into workshops tucked behind thick stone doorways. Others head toward small shops where shutters are just beginning to open. A few continue down the long slope of the Royal Mile toward the busy trading areas closer to the city gates. The work itself is rarely dramatic. Most of it is repetitive, steady, quietly exhausting. If you step into one of the smaller workshops along the street, the first thing you might notice is the light, or rather, the lack of it. Windows in these buildings are narrow, and daylight enters slowly. Because of this, most work tables are placed directly beside the glass where the pale Scottish daylight can fall across tools and materials. Near one window, a shoemaker bends over a wooden form known as a last. The leather in his hands is thick and stubborn. He pulls it carefully across the shape of the shoe, guiding the material with a curved needle and heavy thread. Each stitch must be tight, durable. A shoe is not something easily replaced. Many customers expect their footwear to last for years. The shoemaker's fingers move steadily, repeating the same motion again and again. Pull, tighten, pull again. Outside the window, the street continues its slow rhythm. But inside the workshop, time feels different, more focused, more contained. Not far away, another worker sits at a narrow bench repairing metal tools. A small hammer taps gently against a blade resting on an iron surface. The sound is soft but persistent, echoing faintly against the stone walls. Tap, pause, tap again. These sounds might continue for hours. In another part of the street, a tailor works beside a pile of worn clothing, brought in by customers hoping to extend the life of their garments. Fabric spreads across the table like quiet landscapes of wool and linen. The tailor's needle moves in careful lines, repairing, reinforcing, sometimes reshaping an old coat to fit a younger member of the same family. Clothing, like shoes, must endure. There is little room for waste. Outside the shops, other kinds of work unfold in the open air. Porters move slowly along the street carrying crates balanced carefully across their shoulders. The crates may hold food, tools, or goods arriving from ships docked along the nearby coast. Their steps are steady, measured. The weight they carry encourages patience rather than speed. Nearby, a woman kneels beside a wooden tub filled with cloudy water. She scrubs clothing against a rough washboard, her hands moving rhythmically as soap and water slowly loosen the dirt gathered from many days of wear. Laundry is not a quick task. Each piece of fabric must be worked carefully, rinsed, wringed out, then carried somewhere to dry. Overhead, lines of laundry already stretch between windows like pale banners swaying gently in the breeze. Everywhere you look, someone is working, not dramatically, not urgently, but continuously. Even the children who wander through the streets often carry small responsibilities, running errands, delivering messages, helping family members transport small bundles or tools. These tasks teach them the rhythm of city life long before they reach adulthood. Meanwhile, the presence of the castle remains above it all. You see it occasionally when the street opens enough to reveal the rocky hill where its walls stand. But the workers below rarely pause to admire it. Their attention belongs to the tasks directly in front of them. A stitch that must be finished, a crate that must be delivered, a garment that must be repaired before nightfall. Hours pass this way, slowly, quietly, and if you were to remain in the street long enough, you would begin to notice something interesting. The city does not grow louder as the day progresses. Instead, the sounds blend together into a kind of steady background rhythm. Hammer taps, footsteps, low voices, the creak of wagon wheels, none of them overwhelming. Just the steady music of ordinary labor. Eventually the sun climbs higher behind the drifting clouds, though its light remains pale and cool. Inside the workshops, workers pause briefly to stretch their backs or warm their hands beside small fires. Then they return to their tasks. Because in 1800s Edinburgh, work is rarely finished quickly. It simply continues, hour after hour, day after day. Beneath the quiet stone shadow of the castle above, if you remain in the streets of Edinburgh in the early 1800s long enough, you begin to notice something that no drawing or painting from the time can fully capture. It is not something you see, it is something you smell. At first, the scents arrive quietly, almost indistinct beneath the cool air drifting through the narrow streets. The breeze carries hints of coal smoke from dozens of chimneys overhead, curling slowly upward from the tall stone tenements. Coal is everywhere in the city. Nearly every home burns it for warmth. Nearly every workshop depends on it for heat. And so the air always carries a faint trace of smoke dry, slightly bitter and constant. You grow used to it quickly. But coal smoke is only the beginning. As you continue walking along the cobbled streets, other smells gradually join the air around you. Some are pleasant, others are less so. From a nearby bakery comes the warm scent of bread still cooling from the oven. The smell drifts outward into the street, mixing with the morning air in a way that feels comforting and familiar. A few steps later, the aroma changes again. Fish sellers often set up their carts along busy corners, and the smell of the sea arrives with them. Their wooden crates hold fresh catch brought inland from the nearby Firth of Forth. Herring, cod, sometimes shellfish packed carefully in damp straw. The scent is sharp, but not entirely unpleasant, simply a reminder that the ocean lies just beyond the horizon. But other odors linger in the city as well, because Edinburgh in the early 19th century does not yet possess the systems that modern cities use to quietly remove waste from daily life. Water must be carried by hand, and waste often follows a far less elegant path. As you move along the street, you may notice narrow channels carved along the edges of the cobbles. These shallow gutters guide rainwater downhill toward the lower parts of the city. When storms arrive, they help wash dirt and debris away. But on dry days, the gutters sometimes hold things the rain has not yet carried off. Bits of straw, food scraps, occasionally other things that people prefer not to think about too closely. Residents try to keep the streets clean when they can. Sweepers move through certain areas with long brooms, pushing debris toward carts that carry it away. But the work cannot always keep pace with the life of a crowded city, and so the air becomes a mixture. Smoke, bread, fish, damp stone, and other scents that drift quietly through the narrow passages between buildings. Yet even this mixture changes depending on where you stand. Near the bakeries, warmth and yeast dominate the air. Near the tanneries where leather is processed, the smell grows heavier, earthy, and strong, the result of chemicals and natural materials used to soften hides. Near markets, vegetables and herbs add brief bursts of freshness, and near the docks the scent of salt water sometimes pushes its way inland with the wind. But perhaps the most distinctive smell of the city is the one that comes from the buildings themselves. Stone holds scent surprisingly well. The thick walls of Edinburgh's tenements absorb decades of smoke, dampness, and human life. When the air grows cool and still, these scents slowly drift back out again. If you step into a narrow, close one of the tight passageways that lead between buildings, you may notice the air becoming slightly heavier. Less wind reaches these spaces. The smell of damp stone grows stronger. Sometimes a faint scent of coal lingers from fires burning inside nearby homes. Other times the close carries the quiet odor of wet earth where sunlight rarely reaches the ground. These small passages form a hidden network throughout the city, shortcuts used by residents who know the streets well. But even in these quiet corridors, life leaves its mark. Laundry hangs overhead between windows. A barrel sits against a wall waiting to be collected. Somewhere above, someone empties a small basin of water out a window, calling a warning beforehand to those below. The water splashes onto the stones, briefly refreshing the air before joining the gutter that runs down the street. Moments later, the smell returns to its usual mixture. If you remain here long enough, something interesting happens. Your senses begin to adapt. The sharpness fades. What once felt overwhelming becomes simply normal. People living in Edinburgh during the 1800s rarely think about the smell of their city. It surrounds them every day from childhood onward. To them it is simply the air of home, the same way modern cities carry their own quiet signatures. Exhaust, asphalt, rain on concrete. This earlier world carries the scent of coal, stone, and crowded life. And yet, even among these layers of smell, moments of calm appear. A sudden breeze moves down the street, pushing smoke aside and bringing cooler air from the hills beyond the city. For a moment, the smell of damp grass replaces the heavier scents of the street. Someone nearby opens a bakery door. Fresh bread spills its warmth into the air again. And the city breathes quietly, smoke drifting upward, rain gutters waiting for the next storm, stone buildings holding the memory of every fire that has burned inside them. The smell of 1800s Edinburgh is not a single thing. It is a slow mixture, changing street by street, hour by hour. Just another part of life unfolding gently beneath the tall gray buildings of the old town. In a city like Edinburgh in the early 1800s, illness is never far away. Children cough quietly in narrow rooms. Adults labor through the streets with persistent fatigue. Fires burn steadily in hearths, but warmth is scarce, and damp stone walls encourage chills to settle into joints and bones. Sickness moves slowly, almost like a shadow that stretches across the days. It is rarely dramatic, rarely sudden. Instead, it arrives quietly one day of discomfort, a lingering headache, a stomach that refuses to settle. In the crowded tenements, it spreads easily. The same room that shelters a family also contains the same air, the same surfaces touched repeatedly. One cough, one touch of a damp hand on a shared chair, and the discomfort can extend quietly to others. Doctors are not common. Even when one is nearby, their services are expensive and slow. Most households rely on home remedies passed down quietly through generations. A pot of herbal tea simmers on the fire. A poultice of oatmeal or leaves rests gently against aching skin. A hand carefully massages a sore joint with simple oils. Everything is gentle, cautious, and intended to maintain steady survival rather than to cure dramatically. Fever is not battled aggressively. Instead, warmth is offered, fluids are measured, and rest is encouraged. Sometimes, illness never fully leaves. A persistent cough lingers into the next season. A mild fever returns occasionally in winter. Residents grow accustomed to living with discomfort as part of the rhythm of life. For minor injuries, a cut, a burn, a sprain care is quiet and methodical. A clean cloth is pressed to the wound. A simple salve made of fat, herbs, or ash may be applied. No excitement accompanies the treatment. There is no sudden triumph, only a slow hope that time and patience will allow the body to heal. The midwives and apothecaries who serve the city do so quietly. Their work is steady and repetitive. Midwives attend childbirth in dim stone rooms, guiding the process with calm authority. They offer advice on diet, warmth, and care, often repeating the same instructions for each family in each home. Apothecaries measure herbs and powders carefully, their small glass bottles reflecting the dim light of the shop. Each teaspoon of medicine is counted precisely, intended to alleviate rather than astonish. Sometimes illness claims lives. Slowly, quietly, no one shouts, no one screams. Instead, the day passes, and a resident simply does not wake again. Morning comes for some, and for others it does not. Neighbors notice, of course. There is a quiet rhythm to it. Morning is not loud. It is a folding of blankets, a closing of shutters, a small pause in the ongoing routines of life. In a city as crowded as Edinburgh, Survival requires both noticing and continuing. Children growing up here learn these rhythms naturally. They witness quiet care, slow treatment, and the delicate balance between life and persistent illness. They grow used to observing quietly and acting carefully, passing knowledge down without fanfare. Even the streets themselves hold hints of this daily struggle. Narrow alleys are damp. Rainwater collects where it will, encouraging slips and minor accidents. Smoke and coal dust linger in the air, settling gently into lungs that are already working hard against chill and damp. Residents adjust to these conditions as part of life rather than disruption. Hospitals exist, but they are few and reserved for the most desperate cases. Crowded wards hold people quietly, sometimes for weeks. The pace of care is slow, careful, and methodical. Doctors move between beds with quiet authority, noting temperature, pulse, and breathing, but rarely delivering dramatic announcements. The patient's endurance is as important as any treatment. Recovery is often slow. A cough diminishes over many days. A fever retreats gradually, accompanied by careful attention to warmth, hydration, and gentle food. The stone walls of the room hold warmth poorly, so blankets and fires are precious. Each small measure helps stabilize the body, step by step, hour by hour, until the person can stand again and rejoin the rhythm of the city. And when the patient returns to the streets, they resume work quietly. A shoemaker bends over his last. A child carries water slowly up the spiral staircase. A woman stirs porridge over the coal fire. Life continues, always gently, always gradually, beneath the stone shadow of Edinburgh's old town. In the early 1800s, this quiet attention to survival, to endurance, and to methodical care defines much of daily life. Illness is part of it, yes, but so is persistence. Every step, every stitch, every bucket of water, every simple meal contributes to maintaining a fragile, steady equilibrium. And it is this balance, the slow navigation between health and sickness, between warmth and chill, between labor and rest, that shapes the rhythm of life. Every resident learns it, quietly, almost imperceptibly, as part of the city's fabric. The stone walls absorb it. The narrow streets carry it. The low fires and dim windows contain it. And so, Edinburgh moves gently through its mornings, its afternoons, and its evening's residents, carrying both the weight of work and the quiet knowledge that each small action helps them endure. As the day begins to fade in Edinburgh's old town, the city takes on a different character. The narrow streets that were once filled with slow footsteps, clattering carts, and the soft calls of vendors now quiet gradually. Smoke from the many hearths rises into the cooling air, curling upward in thin, twisting streams before disappearing into the pale gray evening sky. Inside the tenements, the rhythm of life slows as well. Families return to their single rooms. Doors creak gently as they open and close, bringing in the faint scents of bread, coal, damp stone, and the distant sea. Children who had run errands or played quietly in the closes and courtyards return with small bundles, their shoes and clothing marked by cobbled streets. The hearth becomes the focus once again. Coal is added carefully, not in large amounts, because it must last through the long evening and night. The fire glows faintly, sending warm, muted light across the rough stone walls, illuminating faces and hands busy with small, deliberate tasks. Dinner is often simple. Perhaps a thin soup, a small portion of porridge with whatever vegetables are available, or a few slices of bread. The meal is eaten quietly, sometimes with a soft conversation murmuring between family members, sometimes in silence. Every movement is deliberate, stirring the pot, lifting a bowl, pouring water from a carefully heated container. Children are encouraged to help, but only gently. They may sweep the floor, arrange bedding, or fold clothing in preparation for the night. Every action is calm and steady, reinforcing the rhythm of care and patience that defines daily life. As the light outside fades further, the window becomes a faint gray rectangle against the darkening stone. The shadows of the buildings stretch across the narrow streets, merging with the lingering smoke from fires below. From somewhere in the tenement, A soft cough or the creak of a chair adds a quiet note to the gentle symphony of evening. Evening chores continue at a slow pace. Water must be carried and stored for the night. Bowls and pots are washed carefully, using the last of the heated water. The smell of damp stone and coal mingles with faint traces of herbs from medicinal remedies, or the simple scent of laundry that has been folded and placed away. Inside the small room, the family prepares for rest. Beds are arranged. Blankets are pulled into place. Every corner is attended to. The warmth of the fire and the careful layering of blankets will provide comfort through the chill of the night. Outside, the streets quiet further. Carts stop moving. Vendors close their tables. The sound of the city narrows to the occasional echo of footsteps or the soft murmur of conversation from a distant close. Smoke rises slowly, catching what little light remains. Time seems to stretch differently in the evening. Every movement is slower, every sound more pronounced against the subdued background. If you watch long enough, you notice how small routines, folding cloth, brushing crumbs from a table, moving a pot closer to the fire take on a rhythm of their own, almost hypnotic in its repetition. Children finish small tasks and move toward their shared bed. Parents follow, tending to minor repairs in clothing, checking that water and fire are ready for the night. Even the smallest creatures, the family cat if one exists, move quietly, weaving between legs and furniture, aware that the city has entered its slower phase. From the window, you can see the outlines of neighboring buildings merging with the darkening sky. The streets below are almost empty now, though a few silhouettes move carefully, returning home after labor that has lasted the full day. Their steps echo faintly, soft against the stones, adding a gentle rhythm to the stillness. The hearth continues to glow, though the flames are low. Shadows stretch and dance gently along the walls. The quiet of the room encourages reflection. People may sit for a moment, watching coals, thinking of the day past, of the work that awaits tomorrow. No urgency presses upon them. The weight of survival is steady, not dramatic. As night deepens, the chill in the stone walls becomes more apparent. Blankets are pulled closer. The fire crackles softly. The city outside seems both vast and contained, layered with tall tenement buildings, narrow streets, and quiet courtyards. Life here is a careful balance, warmth against cold, labor against rest, presence against absence. Eventually, candles or small oil lamps are lit, sending flickering light across walls and ceilings. Shadows mingle with the soft glow. The last movements of the evening folding laundry, securing a pot, smoothing straw in a bed occur slowly, and then, gradually, the family settles. The fire continues to glow quietly, providing gentle warmth. The room becomes still, breathes slow. The chill remains at the edges, but the weight of the day eases. In 1800s Edinburgh, evenings are a slow surrender. Work has been done. Hunger has been addressed, if modestly. Bodies relax under blankets. The city outside holds its own quiet rhythm, just as attentive and steady as the one inside the tenements. Time passes gently. The narrow streets and high stone walls contain the calm. Every chimney, every hearth, every quiet room contributes to the muted pulse of the city. Eventually, the last remnants of light fade. Shadows deepen. Fires burn low. Even the streets, once active, rest. The night stretches outward over Old Town Edinburgh, carrying the quiet endurance of its residents like a soft, steady breath. And inside each room, the people who inhabit this stone city drift slowly towards sleep. Not hurriedly, not abruptly, slowly, as they have always done. Their lives measured by small actions, quiet routines, and gentle perseverance, beneath walls that have witnessed centuries of similar evenings. Night in 1800s Edinburgh arrives slowly. The last traces of pale gray light fade from the sky. The narrow streets of the old town, once filled with the muted rhythms of carts and footsteps, now grow quiet. Smoke from chimneys continues to rise into the cool night air, curling lazily against the darkening stone walls. The city exhales a soft, steady breath, and in the tenements above, The same quiet pulse is felt inside each room. Inside the small chamber you have followed all day, the fire burns low, its coals glowing a steady red. Shadows stretch across the rough stone walls, bending around furniture and household objects. The room seems to hold its own weight in silence, a kind of measured calm that has grown over centuries. You notice small, deliberate movements. A hand reaches for the last warm bowl of porridge left from the evening meal, stirring it gently before sipping. A child pulls a blanket closer around their shoulders, shifting slightly to make the straw mattress more comfortable. Every gesture is slow, intentional, and careful. Outside, the streets are nearly empty. Occasionally, a faint echo of movement drifts upward. A door closing, distant footsteps on cobblestones, the soft clatter of a cart completing its last deliveries. But these are exceptions, not the rule. The city has settled into night. Inside the room, the quiet vigil continues. The adults may sit by the hearth, watching the low coals, reflecting on the day. They are alert but calm. Their attention is divided between caring for small tasks and allowing themselves to rest. There is no hurry. There is only endurance. Illness or injury may still be present in the household. The cough that lingered through the day continues in a child, soft and rhythmic. A slight fever, steady but low, is noticed in a family member. Remedies are applied gently. A poultice laid carefully. Herbal tea sipped slowly. Blankets arranged to preserve warmth. Every movement is deliberate, measured, and calm. Outside, the wind may shift, carrying the faint smell of damp stone, coal, and the distant sea. Occasionally rain falls lightly on the cobbled streets, pattering softly against shutters and rooftops. The sound is gentle, almost hypnotic, merging with the low murmur of the city's breathing. As hours pass, consciousness begins to ebb slowly. Eyes grow heavy. Limbs sink into straw mattresses or wooden benches. The fire flickers, sending gentle warmth across the walls and floors. Shadows lengthen and merge until they dominate the room, holding the inhabitants in a soft enclosing quiet. For many, sleep comes in cycles. They drift in and out, sometimes aware of a creak in the floor, a distant cough, or the faint rumble of a cart far below. The mind adapts to the steady rhythms, allowing rest to be as complete as possible within the constraints of the stone room. The city itself becomes a partner in this vigilance. Tenement walls hold warmth and the faint echoes of past lives. Chimneys continue to release smoke, and the quiet streets carry only the most subdued activity. There is a shared endurance both of people and of place that stretches through the night hours. Occasionally, a small disturbance may draw attention. A child shifts in their sleep, a pot cracks slightly from heat, or someone quietly moves to tend to a lingering task. Each event is minor and handled with patience. The day's labor has taught endurance. The night's vigil is no different. Time passes slowly, almost imperceptibly. The long night stretches outward. The city sleeps in layers. Families in one-room chambers, merchants closing shutters, porters resting after their daily burdens. Each person moves within the confines of the evening, attentive to survival, comfort, and warmth. The coals in the hearth continue to glow faintly, their light softening the darkness. Shadows ripple gently across walls and furniture. The room seems suspended in a calm rhythm, a slow heartbeat that carries its occupants toward deeper rest. Outside, the faint sound of the wind, a distant dog, or the trickle of water in a gutter becomes part of the night's texture rather than a disruption. Life continues gently, almost imperceptibly, as though the city itself were breathing in unison with its inhabitants. And in this quiet, the lessons of the day linger, the importance of careful work, attention to routine, measured care for illness, and patient endurance. These rhythms are both survival and habit, a slow orchestration that allows life to continue even within crowded, cold, and damp stone walls. Eventually, sleep claims all who remain in the room. Even the faint coughs, the low murmur of voices, the gentle creaks of furniture settle into the night. Only the coals maintain a steady, dim glow, echoing the quiet pulse of life in the tenement. Night in 1800s Edinburgh is not dramatic. It is persistent. It is calm. it is endurance. And as the darkness deepens outside, the city and its people drift together into a soft, steady, measured rest. Before the sun rises fully over Edinburgh's old town, the city already begins its quiet preparation for another day. The narrow streets are still mostly empty, though the faintest movement suggests life stirring within the stone walls. A chimney releases its first trace of smoke, thin and pale against the gray light. Somewhere, a small cart creaks as it is positioned for early deliveries. Footsteps sound softly on the damp cobbles, careful, measured, almost as though the city itself holds its breath. Inside the tenements, those who rise early do so slowly. Bodies stretched beneath straw mattresses respond first to discomfort and habit, then to the faint chill creeping along cold stone floors. Hands reach for blankets, adjusting warmth. A small fire may be coaxed back into life with a few pieces of coal, the coals glowing softly in the dim pre-dawn light. Water is carried carefully from the communal supply or a nearby well. Bowls and small kettles are filled for tea or porridge. The sounds are subtle, water pouring into a basin, a spoon tapping gently against the side of a bowl, the whisper of cloth as it dries or folds. Each action is quiet, purposeful, and part of a carefully maintained rhythm. Children, if awake, assist with minor chores. They sweep the stone floor, carry small bundles of kindling, or bring water to the cooking area. Their movements are slower than the day before, deliberate and careful, guided by the soft lessons of endurance that the city imparts from the earliest age. From upstairs, a faint cough may signal that someone remains unwell, but attention is quiet. Remedies are applied gently, a sip of warm herbal tea, a poultice pressed to aching joints, blankets adjusted for comfort. There is no urgency. Illness is met with careful patience, its presence absorbed into the rhythm of early morning. Outside, the streets gradually take on the pale light of dawn. Cobblestones glisten faintly with overnight moisture. A soft mist may cling to the stone walls and the lower levels of the tenements. Smoke rises from chimneys, mingling with the mist in thin, curling lines. Vendors begin to prepare their carts, stacking vegetables and loaves of bread with care. Each movement is repeated slowly, methodically, as though the rhythm itself guides the body more than the mind. Bread is dusted lightly with flour, crates are checked for sturdiness, and water from small buckets is sprinkled to settle dust before the day begins in earnest. Apprentices and workers emerge, carrying tools, arranging materials, or simply moving quietly toward the first tasks of the day. Their footsteps on the stones are soft, careful, measured by the narrowness of the streets and the awareness that the city is still waking. Birds may call from nearby roofs, their faint cries echoing between the tenements. Their presence adds a subtle soundtrack to the city's slow stirring. The wind may shift, carrying with it the mixed scents of bread, coal smoke, damp stone, and distant sea. All these layers together form the signature aroma of dawn in Old Town Edinburgh. By the time the first real light reaches the tops of the tall tenements, the city has already begun its quiet work. Doors open, curtains are drawn, laundry is adjusted on lines stretching across the narrow gaps between buildings. Carts start rolling, delivering the first goods for the day. In each room, inhabitants move with deliberate care. Breakfast is prepared simply, porridge, thin broth, or small portions of bread. Bowls and utensils are washed after each use. Fires are stoked gently. Every motion is calibrated for both efficiency and endurance, conserving warmth, energy, and materials for the long hours to come. Children follow the routines they have learned, fetching water, helping with minor repairs, tidying bedding. Adults move steadily among these tasks, supervising quietly, attending to small needs. Even cats, perhaps a dog, move calmly through the dim rooms, aware that the day has not yet fully arrived. From the streets you notice that even the carts that will eventually carry produce and goods are slow in motion. Horses adjust their steps carefully along the cobbled stones. Drivers guide them with measured patience, knowing that the rhythm of survival requires slow, steady movement rather than haste. And as the sun begins to rise fully, faintly illuminating the high stone walls and leaning tenements, The city seems to exhale. Smoke curls higher into the pale morning sky. Doors open fully. Voices rise softly, more confidently now. The day is ready to begin, though its pace will remain deliberate, steady, and enduring. This is 1800s Edinburgh at dawn, a city in constant quiet preparation. Each small movement, water carried, bread prepared, coals stoked, fits into a long pattern of survival, endurance, and habitual care. Life has already begun before most visitors would imagine, moving deliberately, patiently, beneath stone walls that have witnessed countless mornings just like this. And if you stand quietly in a narrow street watching and listening, you notice that the city's rhythm is hypnotic. Footsteps, low voices, the creak of a cart, the distant call of a bird. Each sound and movement blends into a steady, unhurried pulse. You begin to understand the subtle endurance required to live here. The early hours are both gentle and demanding. Comfort is scarce, and yet the city provides everything necessary for survival, shelter, warmth, community, and routine. The inhabitants know how to navigate these conditions. Slowly, patiently, without haste. They embody a quiet resilience that carries them through both cold nights and long days. By the time the streets brighten fully, the city's rhythm is established. Work begins in earnest. Vendors open their stalls completely, and the full day unfolds. But the memory of the slow, gentle, patient dawn lingers. It reminds every resident, every visitor, that life in Old Town Edinburgh is defined not by dramatic events, but by measured endurance, careful attention, and the quiet art of simply persisting. As the morning fully unfolds, the rhythm of life in 1800s Edinburgh becomes more visible. The streets fill slowly, not with sudden bustle, but with a steady, measured flow of bodies. Merchants set up their tables, their hands moving carefully as they arrange loaves of bread, bundles of vegetables, or crates of fish. The motions are deliberate, every item placed carefully, every gesture repeated countless times before, each day like the last. Apprentices and workers leave their homes carrying the tools of their trade. A shoemaker shoulders a bundle of leather. A carpenter lifts his plane and saw, feeling their weight against his hands. Each movement is methodical, conserving energy while preparing for hours of continuous labor. The day stretches ahead. Time in the city is slow. There are no clocks in every home or public announcements marking each hour. Instead, life measures itself in work cycles, tasks completed, bread baked, shoes repaired, fires maintained, water fetched. Labor is not dramatic. It is persistent, quietly exhausting. A blacksmith hammers at a tool in a dim, smoky workshop. Tap, tap, tap. Over and over. The rhythm is hypnotic, and yet fatigue builds subtly in arms and shoulders. The body adapts. Muscle memory carries the work even when the mind begins to wander. In another room, a tailor sews clothing for a customer. The needle pierces thick fabric repeatedly. Threads pull taut. Each stitch matters, though no one will notice the effort spent once the garment leaves the workshop. Outside, porters carry heavy loads along cobbled streets, balancing crates on their shoulders, feeling the constant resistance of uneven stones. Step by step, they move carefully, conserving strength, adjusting balance, enduring fatigue hour after hour. Lunch, when it arrives, is simple. A bowl of porridge, a slice of bread, perhaps a bit of cheese or leftover meat. It is eaten slowly, deliberately, sometimes shared quietly with children who have returned briefly from errands or schooling. After eating, the work continues. Shops reopen, repairs resume, deliveries proceed. Life is relentless, not in sudden bursts of danger or excitement, but in the unceasing demands of labor. Every hand and body is engaged. Even those who rest do so in shifts, ensuring that the needs of the household or workplace continue without interruption. Fatigue becomes noticeable in small ways. Shoulders slump slightly, eyes grow heavy, hands move slower, though the rhythm of repetition carries them forward. There is no urgency, only the awareness that the day is long and must be endured. In the tenements, meals are prepared with care but little variety. Fires burn steadily to cook them. Water is measured. Utensils and pots are cleaned between uses, though efficiency and frugality dominate over comfort. Every movement is part of a long, slow rhythm. Children assist where they can, their small hands carrying light loads, fetching water, or tidying spaces. Even in their energy there is patience, a learned endurance passed down from adults who understand the necessity of measured labor. By mid-afternoon, the sun has shifted across the city, casting long shadows along narrow streets and tall stone buildings. The light illuminates dust and smoke hanging gently in the air. Every movement of labor is accompanied by this muted light, reinforcing the steady, deliberate pace. Some workers pause briefly to rest, leaning against stone walls, wiping sweat from brows, adjusting the weight of a load, stretching aching muscles. Others continue, their fatigue building silently, almost imperceptibly, as the day advances. Evening is still hours away, but the long labor has already imprinted its subtle mark on every body and mind. The city moves with a quiet, hypnotic rhythm. Tasks repeat. Sounds repeat. The patterns of work, endurance, and observation create a continuous steady pulse. Those who can look around may notice the shadows stretching further, the faint curling smoke from chimney tops, the distant sounds of children playing quietly or animals stirring. All these elements exist alongside the labor, unnoticed by many, yet felt as a subtle, continuous background to each day. This is Edinburgh in the 1800s, a city defined not by spectacle, but by persistence, routine, and the steady application of labor. There are no dramatic interruptions, no sudden dangers. Instead, endurance itself becomes both challenge and survival. And slowly, as the day wears on, the city begins to prepare for the return of evening. Coals are stoked. Shops close their shutters briefly for midday breaks. Workers stretch their tired bodies and consider the continuation of their tasks. Small routines, tidying, resting, preparing for the next set of chores, carry the rhythm forward. Fatigue does not signal the end, it signals continuity. Each step, each stitch, each carefully carried load builds upon the day that came before. Life here is a quiet orchestration of small movements, each repeated with care, producing survival in its slowest, calmest form. By late afternoon, the streets begin to shift again, hinting at the approach of evening, when labor gradually recedes and households prepare once more for the long night ahead. The city exhales gently, and the rhythm of endurance pauses briefly before resuming its cycle in the next day. The slow accumulation of fatigue, repetition, and careful effort is at the heart of survival in Old Town Edinburgh. It is a life without urgency, a life measured in small accomplishments, quiet resilience, and unceasing attention to the steady demands of labor. And as the sun dips low in the sky, painting the high stone walls with muted gold, the inhabitants move deliberately toward the next phase of the day, evening, reflection, and the gentle surrender of consciousness. As the evening of the city fades into full night, it is possible to pause and reflect on what life in 1800s Edinburgh truly entailed. The day, as you have seen, is measured not by drama or excitement, but by quiet endurance. The rhythm of labor, the careful tending of fires, the measured pace of meals, the slow and deliberate attention to illness, all of these form a continuous cycle that defines existence within the stone walls of the old town. You begin to understand that survival in this city depends on subtle attentiveness, noticing the weight of a basket of water, the shifting smoke from a chimney, the slight cough of a child, or the gentle sag of a shoulder after hours of work. Every small observation contributes to maintaining balance, preserving warmth, and preventing discomfort from tipping into danger. Inhabitants of Edinburgh at this time live constantly with endurance. It is quiet, uncelebrated, and steady. They rise early, labor slowly, and rest carefully. The days are long, but not hurried. Fatigue is present, persistent, yet manageable. Illness lingers quietly and is met with measured attention. Hunger is seldom acute, but always a presence to acknowledge. The city itself, with its tall stone buildings, narrow closes, and cobbled streets, shapes this life, guiding movement, shaping routines, and reinforcing the subtle discipline of persistence. You notice how the same routines repeat day after day, week after week, year after year. Yet within this sameness there is a slow beauty of rhythm that is both hypnotic and sustaining. The smoke from chimneys rises in thin, curling streams. Fires glow faintly in the windows of dim tenements. Laundry hangs across narrow alleys, swaying gently in the breeze. And through it all the inhabitants carry on, quietly, deliberately, enduring in small increments, hour by hour. The city is not comfortable in any modern sense. It is cold, damp, crowded, and persistent in its demands. Yet there is a form of stability here, a predictable flow of tasks, sounds, and smells that allows life to continue. Comfort is a relative measure. Survival is absolute. Residents adapt to the stone walls, the coal smoke, the lingering chill, and the low light. They find solace in routines that may seem small but are essential. Tending fires, stirring porridge, arranging bedding, caring for the sick, carrying water, mending clothes, and observing the rhythms of the city. Even the streets contribute to this steady endurance. Narrow and winding, they funnel movement in predictable ways. Closes, alleys, and courtyards create spaces that are sheltered yet alive with activity. The sounds of footsteps, carts, and faint voices echo softly, providing cues for timing, coordination, and vigilance. And when the day ends, the streets quiet once more, as though the city itself exhales after hours of continuous, measured work. There is a quietness here that modern cities seldom achieve. It is not a stillness born of emptiness, but of steady, controlled activity. It is a calmness that arises when every person understands their role in the rhythm of the day, when each movement is deliberate, and when endurance is the central skill of survival. Illness, fatigue, and discomfort are ever-present companions, but they are met without panic. Care is quiet, measured, and continuous. Remedies are simple but effective in sustaining life. The faint glow of a coal fire, a warm blanket, a small portion of nourishing food, and gentle attention are more important than any sudden intervention. And in the night when the city finally rests, you notice that this endurance does not disappear. It transitions into a subtle vigilance. The faint smoke still rises from chimneys. The coals continue to glow. The sounds of occasional footsteps, distant voices, or a creak of wood provide a quiet accompaniment to sleep. Residents drift in and out of consciousness, aware of their surroundings yet allowing themselves the necessary rest to continue enduring the next day. This pattern, repeated over and over, forms a life of quiet resilience. Life in 1800s Edinburgh is defined less by events than by persistence. The passing of hours, the slow accumulation of labor, the careful tending of the self and others. These are the true measures of survival. You begin to realize that the city, the buildings, the streets, and the people are intertwined in a vast, unhurried system. Stone absorbs the smoke, the coals, the warmth, and the labor. Streets guide movement and rhythm. Work shapes the body and mind. Routine carries the spirit through discomfort. And night allows rest, preparing everyone for the repetition of endurance. Modern comfort, in comparison, is almost alien. Warmth is constant. Water flows freely. Illness can be treated quickly. Labor is often specialized and less physically demanding. Yet in 1800s Edinburgh, survival requires constant vigilance, subtle observation, and patience. Every small action, every careful adjustment, contributes to maintaining life within the constraints of the environment. And this is the lesson of the city. Endurance is an art form. Fatigue is accepted and managed. Labor is repetitive yet meaningful. Illness is part of life, not an interruption. The passing of hours is a slow meditation in stone and smoke, bread and coal, water and warmth. Each day is survived gently, deliberately, and without haste. As the night deepens, you can imagine the quiet interiors of countless tenements, each one echoing with the rhythms of endurance, the low glow of coals, the shifting of blankets, the careful movements of bodies in preparation for rest. The city sleeps, but not entirely. It maintains a subtle heartbeat, a pulse of survival, patience, and quiet observation. And when the morning arrives again, the cycle repeats. Smoke rises, carts move, footsteps echo. Fires glow, water is carried, bread is baked, and labor resumes. The endurance of the city and its inhabitants is constant, uninterrupted, and deeply human. If you close your eyes now, you can feel it, the steady rhythm of life in a crowded, stone city. The faint weight of coal smoke in the air, the subtle warmth of a fire, the quiet endurance of families moving deliberately through hours of labor, the gentle passage of time marked by small actions rather than loud events. This is 1800s Edinburgh, a city that survives not through spectacle or urgency but through repetition, care, and slow, deliberate endurance. A city where life is measured in subtle increments, where fatigue and discomfort coexist with small comforts, and where every hour lived is a quiet triumph of persistence. And as you release yourself from this vision, you carry with you a sense of calm understanding. Not everything that is challenging needs to be dramatic. Not everything that endures needs to be noticed. In the slow rhythm of stone, coal, and human care, there is a quiet poetry, a subtle, enduring reflection on what it truly means to survive, to labor, and to live.